Well, hello fellow crafters, Janine here, and today is going to be the first part in a series on beginning sewing. And I am not claiming to be an expert sewer by any stretch of the imagination. I am nowhere near qualified to start making garments for people to wear or making custom fit anything. Mostly the sewing that I am experienced in is craft sewing, so what I would consider decorative sewing, like to make a purse, this is a tote bag. And this is going to be the sewing project that we work on for this beginning sewing series. And I've made curtains, and I've made some simple pillows for my home. So I would say, crafty decorative sewing is what I know how to do. I have never even attempted to make a garment. I think I am going to start trying to do that though for my granddaughters. I just think it would be fun to sew them some unique and some very personalized clothing. Little girls like having their own style, and they're fearless. They're just so fearless and not afraid to be who they are at this young and sweet little age of around 2 and 3 years old. Anyway, so if you would like to learn some basics about reading a pattern and sewing a tote bag, then stay tuned for the next few weeks, because I'm probably going to have some other videos in between the sewing videos, but we are going to be covering some basics of reading a pattern, cutting out pattern pieces, and constructing a simple tote bag. Thank you so much, and let's get started. Okay, most patterns that you purchase are going to have a couple of different variations. So like in this purse, it has two, actually more than that, variations, but it shows you the two basic variations or shapes of the purse that you can make. And we're going to be making this purse here, but we're not going to be putting the flowers on it. So that would be the two different variations of this purse. One is with the flowers and one is without. And if you look on the back of your pattern, after you've decided, see, it shows you A is without flowers, B is with, C is a different shape without flowers, and D is that different shape with flowers. So you choose which design you want, and then looking on the pattern, it will tell you exactly how many yards of each fabric to purchase. So knowing that I want to make C without flowers, then I know if the fabric I choose is 45 inches in width, then I know that I'm going to need 1 1/8 yards. But if it's 60 inches in width, then I'm only going to need 3/4 of a yard. And I usually purchase just a little bit extra just in case something goes wrong or my cuttings are off. But anyway, and then if there's a contrasting fabric, which in this case there is, you have a contrasting fabric on the bottom and a contrasting fabric on the handles, which, I mean, it's the same contrasting fabric. And also you're going to have a lining inside the bag. Now you can use that same contrasting fabric, or you can choose just a really plain fabric for the inside that's maybe a little cheaper. I like doing the same, but that's me. So anyway, it tells you how much of contrasting fabric you're going to need, and again it has it broken down. Okay, in this case it doesn't matter if it's 45 inches or 60 inches, either way you're going to need a yard. And then interfacing, which is important, especially in constructing a handbag, or a tote bag, because you want it to have some sturdiness and some structure to it. It doesn't tell you what weight of interfacing to use, but I like using a heavier interfacing because I like my bag to have a pretty good bit of structure to it. So it shows you how many yards of interfacing. In this case it calls for 2 1/8 yards, and then this is where it shows you how much lining you're going to need, or lining fabric you're going to need, 7/8 of a yard in a 45-inch width. So that kind of breaks down for you all the different fabrics you're going to use. Oh my gosh, I just went completely out of my head. Okay, and then notions. And notions are the extra things. Like if you make this bag, you can choose to put a cording in the handle, which will give it a little bit more sturdiness. So you would need, one of the notions you would need would be the cording. These bags do call for a magnetic snap, so that's one of the notions that you're going to need. You're going to need a piece of sturdy cardboard, and you don't have to go out and buy anything. Just look around your house and see what you have. That's what I did. If you want to do a decorative element, you might want to buy some ribbon If you're going to be doing the flowers, they call for pom-pom trim and ribbon and embroidery floss to do some stitching on. Again, I'm not doing the flowers, so I'm not worried about any of that. But I did go ahead and purchase some ribbon because I did a little extra decorative element on my bag that the pattern doesn't call for, and I'll show you that when we get there. So I've got my fabric purchased. I've got it laid out here. This is the going to be the outside of the bag. This is going to be fabric A, let's say, and it's my contrast fabric is going to be this yellow and white polka dot. So I've got my main fabric laid out here. Now what I like to do, because this is who I am, it's just what works for me, is I like to pull my instructions out and go ahead and give them a really thorough reading, so that way I understand, you know, why we're laying the fabric out the way we're laying it out. Because some fabrics, the directionality of the fabric is not going to matter, but this fabric, it matters very, very much. So when I'm cutting things out, whatever piece, you know, let's say it's going to be the front and sides and back of the bag, you know, I'm not going to want to cut them this is the top of the bag, and then my fabric will be running sideways around my bag instead of, you know, in the right direction. So you do need to understand the construction of your bag before you get started, you know, and why you're cutting things out the way you're cutting them out, so that when you lay your pattern out on your fabric, you'll be laying everything out in the right direction. And so I like to go ahead and read all of the written directions in this area, because it does tell me, you know, what the all the different markings on the patterns mean, which is very helpful, again, for getting things cut out correctly. And then over here it shows all the pattern pieces, which come in big sheets of tissue like this. And so again, this is where reading the pattern is important, because if you're not making both bags, you don't need to cut out all the pattern pieces that are not going to be, you're not going to be using. So I'm not going to be making bag A or B. So here it shows the pattern pieces, and it shows, okay, this is pattern piece 1 for bags A and B, pattern piece 10 for bags A and B, and so forth, and 13 and 18 for C and D. So this gives me an idea of exactly which pattern pieces I need to cut out. So if I'm not making bags A and B, I don't need to cut out any pieces that are specifically for bags A and B only. I'm only going to need to cut out everything that is for bag C. So everything that has a C in the pattern piece, I'm going to be cutting that pattern piece out of the tissue. And then when we move on, this is, and I'm sorry, I cut my pattern by accident. This is how it shows you. So we're going to go to, this is all B. Oh, here's C. Okay, so it shows you how to lay your pattern pieces out to get the most use out of your fabric. And again, like right here is pattern piece 13. That's going to be the front and back of the bag. So I'm going to want to make sure that the top edge of the pattern on the tissue is laid out on this top edge of my fabric, so that way I'll have the proper direction going on my fabric when I cut it out. And again, it shows you, okay, this is if you're using a 45-inch width piece of fabric, and this is if you're using a 60-inch piece of fabric. So it shows you exactly how to lay out your pattern pieces. And then if you flip the page over, it continues and shows you how to lay out the pieces on your contrasting fabric that correlate to the contrasting color. And it also shows you how to cut out, how to lay out rather, for the interfacing, for the lining. And then this is more of the layout that I used for my interfacing. And this is for all the pieces that are going to call for interfacing, like the bag straps, the front, the back, the sides. You can put interfacing on your lining. I chose not to because I used such a stiff interfacing that it would have been way, way too much. It would have been very difficult to deal with and way too thick to run through my machine. But anyway, so that shows you how to lay everything out. And this gives you some, this is your fabric key, so it shows you when they're when your directions are referring to certain pieces of fabric, it's showing you if you're putting them together right sides together, wrong sides, whether or not it's interfacing, the lining fabric, the right side and the wrong side. And it also gives you some tips about trimming down your seam allowances, which is really important. The first time I made a bag, I didn't bother with it, and there's bulkiness in areas that there doesn't need to be. Had I just trimmed out my seam allowances, it would have made for a much smoother and easier to piece together bag. But I'll show you more about that in detail later. So then it starts into the actual sewing directions. Now, if you're a very experienced sewer and you've learned that you can do things like, okay, well, I don't really need to start with that, I can come back to that later, I'd prefer to start here, then by all means you go for it. But if you are a novice sewer like I was when I began, I highly recommend that you follow the pattern directions from beginning to end. So the bag that we're constructing starts on the second page, and it says bag CD. So I know that this is where the construction of my bag starts. Now, I'm not doing flowers, so I didn't have to cut out those circle pieces or cut them out, or I don't have to do anything with the circle pieces because that's for the flowers. So I really start with the 2, and it says to go ahead and fuse the interfacing wrong side to each matching fabric. But anyway, just if you try, for me, when I first started trying to read, I did read all the directions first, which is not a bad idea, but then trying to understand each section before I actually got to it didn't always make sense to me. Well, why is it doing it like that? But once I had completed these first steps and then, you know, got to that step that I wasn't understanding, well, it made more sense by the time I got there. So that's why I say it's really, if you're a novice, start with your directions from the beginning. So in that spirit, I'm not going to get into the sewing of the bag just yet. I'm going to put that aside, and we're going to go back to laying our fabric pieces out. Now, I do have all the pattern pieces cut out already for my bag C. So what I need to do is to start laying them out on my fabric, and I'm going to get the pieces I don't need and put them aside so they're not in my way. Okay, and this is the other thing I want to point out, and I'm hoping you can see this. Let me put a little something white underneath it so it'll be a little easier to see. Okay, and I'm hoping you can somewhat read that. So this shows you, let me go back to the directions. So this pattern piece I cut out, if you'll see, this is 18 of C and D, and so here's 18, and it tells you what it is, front and back, C and D of the lining, and you need to cut 2 pieces of that, and if you're doing the interfacing, you cut 2 pieces of that. But it shows you everything else you need. Whenever you see this little triangle on one side of the bag, that tells you that's the top center of that piece. So knowing that, then I'm going to want to make sure that I have my pattern piece laid out on my fabric in the proper directionality. For my lining, it doesn't matter because it's that polka dot fabric. It really is just not going to matter that much. This placement line, these are things that you're going to want to have a piece of chalk or some kind of fabric chalk on hand, because you're going to mark that on your fabric because it helps you to line other pieces of fabric that you're going to be sewing. It helps you line those things up. And then this shows you where the grain line of your fabric should be. So this is a lining piece. This is not a piece that I'm cutting right this minute. So I'm going to set it aside. This is the front and back of the bag in the main fabric that you're going to be using. And it shows you, again, this is the top. Here's our little triangle in the center, so we know this is the top center of the bag. It shows you your seam, where you should sew your seams at. When it shows you placement lines, those are important. What you can do is you can cut the square entirely out if you want to, or you can just maybe use a pin and poke holes, and then just go over those holes with your chalk like this gently, because you don't want to rip your tissue, and that'll mark those placement lines for you. That's a couple of ways of doing that. Again, if you were going to be doing the flowers, It shows the placement of the flowers on this particular piece of fabric. And then again, you have another placement line here. So again, that's going to be something you want to mark on your fabric with chalk or whatever kind of fabric marking pen you have. And then it has dots here. So whenever you see dots, or let me find a piece that has, okay, here's one. And you can see here, there's a square. That helps you to line things up, line your pieces up properly. So whenever you see the squares, the dots, or the placement lines, you want to mark those on your fabric in some kind of non-permanent way. Non-permanent is the key, because you don't want to have those markings on your finished piece. So we have a placement line here, and we have placement markings here. So let me go ahead and start laying this out. So if I go to my pattern, I'm using a 45-inch wide piece of fabric. So right here it shows me that my fold is here. I'm sorry, my fold is here, and my selvage edges, so here's my fold here. Here's the fold of my fabric here. And my selvage edges, or selvage edges, however you want to pronounce it, is right here. So according to this, I'm going to want to lay piece 13 on my fold. And I'm most definitely going to want to have the top edge on this side of the fabric, because my fabric is up and down this way. So I'm going to want to make sure that the top is up here, because that will make sure that the direction of my fabric is properly placed when I put it together. So we're going to need pins. I personally prefer straight pins that have a ball tip, colored ball tip. To me, for me personally, it's just easier to see them. They stand out against everything, but you use what you have. Don't go out and buy something just because it's what I said. And what I like to do is kind of start with it in the center, and then work outwards from there. And you just pin your tissue to your fabric, and it'll help it keep it from moving around while you're cutting your fabric out. And just lay it smooth. Now I could have some confidence that that tissue is going to lay pretty still while I get my fabric pieces cut out. So again, I'm just going to take a straight pin, and I'm just going to just poke it along that placement line. To make a hole in the tissue. But again, you can cut this out if you want. This particular placement line, I'll go ahead and let you in on a little clue, is the placement line for your handles of your bag. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just gently go over that with chalk. I mean, you can go out and buy some fancy fabric markers if you want, and the ink or whatever it is washes out. But honest to God, this cheap chalk works just fine for me. I haven't had any problems with it. I'm hoping you'll be able to see that. Not too good. But now that I've got the basic placement down, what I can do is come back, because that is pretty faint, but I can just come back with my ruler and find those dotted lines, and then just go ahead and or I can freehand it, because again, it's for placement, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But now that I've got an idea where they are, I can just go back in with chalk directly in the fabric, and now I can see very clearly where that placement is for that handle. And again, you're going to want to mark the top center of your bag where that arrow was. Again, that helps you get everything lined up. When you start sewing, it helps you to line everything up perfectly. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to lay out, it calls for 2 of number 8, which is a tab that you sew inside to put your magnetic closures on, and they meet like this. So you have here's the top band of the bag, right? So in the middle of the top band is these 2 pieces at number 8 that do like that. You know, you have a magnetic piece on the bottom and a magnetic piece on the top, and they snap together. I don't like that. I don't, because it leaves my bag still kind of gaping open. I'll show you that later, but anyway, just suffice it to say I don't care for that. So I'm not going to be cutting these number 8 pieces out, so I'm going to go ahead and find number 14, which would fit in this area here, and it's also going to help me to save fabric. I'm not going to need to use as much of this fabric by leaving piece 8 out. Just trust me, it's going to work better. But if you want to put those little tabs in, then by all means you feel free to do it. I just don't care for them. Okay, so I'm going to lay, and it's okay because you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. As long as that salvage edge is within the seam allowance, it's okay if you go all the way to it, and I like to, because it's one less cut I have to make, and it also gives me a little bit of a gap, which again just makes the cutting process a little bit easier. But I prefer to cut these pieces next to each other, because this is the front and back of the bag and these are the sides of the bag. So if I cut them next to each other and I line up, see there's a hole right here on this piece, pattern piece, and a hole right there. If those holes line up and these seam allowances line up, then what's going to happen is the pattern on my fabric is also going to line up on my bag, which just makes an overall nicer looking finished piece. So that's me, that's what I like to do. And again, I'm going to go ahead and pin, start kind of in the middle. Okay, that's good. And then since we're not placing piece 8, the next 2 pieces, we only need 2 more pieces on the pattern fabric, and that's pieces 17 and 11. And these are 17 and 11 are going to be the inside band of the purse, and it's going to be what you attach the lining to. So it does, again, it really, directionality is still going to matter very much on these pieces. Okay, since this is going to be the band, and you're only going to see a small part of it, but we are going to want it to it is going to, once it's sewn together, it's going to be like one continuous piece going around the inside of the bag. So it would be nice if the fabric lined up and matched up. So I am going to go ahead and do that and line 17 and 11 up, so that when I sew these pieces together, they match going around the bag. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways you could go about this. Don't go out and buy special equipment. Use what you have. Now, you can grab a handy dandy pair of scissors. This is the only thing I could say you really would want, is to make sure that your scissors are nice and sharp. Dull scissors are not going to go through 2 layers of fabric. It's just not. So you could just take your scissors and staying right next to your pattern piece. And again, this is why it's so important that your pattern pieces be pinned down, because the last thing you want is your fabric wiggling around on you. That's why I prefer a rotary cutter. But if you don't have one, don't feel like you have to run out and buy one to do this. All of these rough edges are going to disappear inside your bag. You're never going to see them, so it's okay if you can't sew a straight line, because I honestly can't either. Okay, what I like to do, this is a nice heavy square ruler that I got from a hardware store. I like it because it is heavy. But I also have, and this is more of a seamstress style ruler, it's plastic and it's longer. I wish this ruler was as long as this one. The problem I have is this plastic ruler is lightweight, and because it is so long, sometimes I have a hard time like holding it down, and when I'm cutting, if I use too much pressure with my cutter, I wiggle that ruler back and forth like that, so I don't end up with really nice cuts sometimes because of that. But this ruler, being metal, is heavier and it doesn't wiggle around as easily. So let me go ahead and show you. I like to have the ruler laying on the pattern piece and then I line the edge up, and this rotary color has a built-in safety piece to protect the because these things are super sharp. They will cut cleanly through skin. I have the scars to prove it. And then what I like to do is, see how they have this side of the rotary cutter and then the blade side. I like to have the blade side against the ruler. That way I get a nice close cut. Okay, this is a more natural angle, to have my ruler on the left side where I can hold it with my left hand, but it'd be out of the way of my blade. This is a natural position for me. And then I start, and you have to apply some pressure. Keep your blade against your ruler, and you get a nice clean cut like that. For me, this is easier than using scissors. But again, if it doesn't feel right to you, if you don't like it, then use scissors. Okay, let me take, again, safety. Please remember to put your safety on your blade. I forget to do it all the time, and I end up with the scars to prove it. I wish I'd cut out my pattern pieces using my rotary cutter. I think I'd have, you see I have very jagged pattern pieces. Alright, so now we have two perfectly cut out pieces, and that are number 11. You can, this is up to you, pin them together to keep them together. It doesn't really matter. Safety first, close that blade. Because I tell you, these things are so sharp, even if you just brush your hand against the blade, not even really like press on it, just brush it against the blade, you're going to be bleeding. Trust me on this. I've learned that the hard way. Okay, one more quick tip that I can give you that's going to help you maybe save you a little frustration and aggravation is some of these pieces that you cut on the fold, you're going to have to cut them apart because they're going to be two completely separate pieces when you start stitching. So my recommendation would be to use your pattern piece to help you do that, to make sure you cut in the right place. Just line your pattern piece up on one half of the piece of fabric to it goes to the edge, to your cut edge. And you might even just want to pin it in place so that you'll know you're cutting exactly where you're supposed to. And then take your rotary cutter or your scissors, whatever you have. Okay, and again, go to the edge of your pattern piece. And now you should have 2 equal sized pieces of fabric. So when you get ready to start stitching, everything should line up perfectly. I almost left an important tip out. Okay, because you are cutting 2 pieces of fabric. So we did our markings on our center points and such, and line up marks on 1 piece of fabric. What you need to do is the flip side of the fabric, where it was folded over, you need to line your pattern up with the other side and mark again. If you have any questions about the directions, if you don't understand a term, or if you don't understand like the keys or what things mean, please feel free to leave me a comment below and ask me those questions. I'd be happy to answer them for you. I'm not gonna lie to you, Google is a great tool. Sometimes if you'll just Google a term, you will get exactly what you need. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed the first part of this video series. There is going to be lots more to come as we construct this bag. I'm not sure how many weeks it's going to be yet. And throughout this video series, you might actually see some different fabric because I'm sewing these up fairly quick because I'm making them for Christmas presents. But I'm going to not miss any steps with you guys. You're still going to see it step by step no matter what fabric you might happen to see in the video. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and just remember to stay tuned because there's going to be more of these sewing videos coming as we go through constructing this bag. If you like what you see here in Janine's craft room, then you need to make sure and click, I think that's going to be my picture down here. So go ahead and click on my picture and it'll bring you to my home page where you can subscribe. Make sure you never miss a video. Make sure you follow me. And if you would like to help support Janine's Craft Room, there's going to be an iCard right about here. And that will bring you to my home page where you can make a donation and help me to bring more of these projects to you, because I'm sure you know these materials don't come free, and I do pay for everything myself at this point in time. I do make a little bit off of the AdSense from from YouTube. But anyway, if you would like to help further support me in bringing these video projects to you, then just click on that link, and any help you can give me would be appreciated. But please know that you're tuning in and showing up to all of my videos is more help than you could ever know. Just so remember to give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know which video series you're enjoying, and as always, have a blessed day. Bye now.